I am no different. Matter of fact, my flaws is probably 20 times worse than others.
Yo, what's good everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Now, before we jump into today's story, I need you to buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you is going to change the way you look at basketball history forever. We're talking about Karl Malone, the mailman, two-time MVP, Hall of Famer, second on the all-time scoring list for decades. A man who was celebrated, idolized, and put on a pedestal by millions of fans across the world. But here's the thing, behind all those accolades, behind all that fame and all that success, there's a dark, twisted story that the NBA and the media tried to bury for years. A story of abuse, abandonment, hypocrisy, and a complete and utter lack of accountability. This is the story of how Karl Malone went from being a basketball legend to one of the most controversial and hated figures in sports. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're gonna understand exactly why his legacy is being torn apart in 2025. Alright, so to understand how Karl Malone became who he is, we gotta go back to the beginning. July 24th, 1963, Summerfield, Louisiana. Now, if you've never heard of Summerfield, don't feel bad. Most people haven't. It's a small, poor, mostly black community where opportunities were few and far between. And Karl Malone was born right in the heart of that struggle. His father, Shedrick Hay, abandoned the family when Karl was just a kid, left them with nothing. And when Karl was only 14 years old, his father died by suicide. Now, Malone didn't talk about this publicly for years. He kept that trauma buried deep inside until a 1994 Sports Illustrated interview where he finally opened up about it. And look, I'm not here to diagnose anyone, but you can see how that kind of pain and abandonment would mess with a young man's head. That trauma, it fueled his ambition, sure, but it also created emotional instability that would follow him for the rest of his life. Now, let's talk about his mother, Shirley Malone. This woman was a warrior, y'all. She worked multiple jobs, picking cotton, cleaning houses, working at a sawmill, just to keep food on the table for her 9 kids. 9 kids, by herself. Shirley was Karl's hero. She gave him an unshakable belief in himself.
My mom is the only person in my life that every dream I had as a little boy, not my siblings, not my friends, not my teachers, anything that other people would laugh and think outlandish, she would always say, I know you would.
That unconditional love and support, it created the drive that made him a basketball legend. But here's where it gets complicated. It also created a sense of entitlement, a belief that he could do no wrong. And that mindset would come back to haunt him in ways nobody could have predicted. Now, Karl didn't start out dreaming of being a basketball player. Nah, his first dream was to be a fighter pilot. Can you imagine that? The mailman flying jets?
People don't realize this. I didn't want to be an athlete. I was a little run of the family. And I got bullied when I was a little boy. As I got to the 9th grade, the only branch of the military who flew the Harrier jets was the Marines. And that was the jet that hovered, went out, came back, landed, they covered it up. And I wanted to fly a Harrier jet.
But somewhere along the way, he discovered basketball, and it became his passion, his escape, his ticket out of poverty. He learned his legendary work ethic from his grandfather, who taught him that nothing in life comes easy.
I started playing basketball. And I said, Mom, I want to be one of the best. But if I'm not the best, no one would ever outwork me.
And Karl took that lesson and ran with it. He worked harder than everybody else. He outworked his opponents. He turned himself into a machine.
Grandfather always told me, don't let any man outwork you. And if you got 2 men with the same mentality, it's going to make for a great show.
At Summerfield High School, he was a problem. A 6'9" power forward who absolutely dominated the competition. He led his team to 3 straight state championships. In his senior year, he was averaging over 30 points and 20 rebounds per game. Those are video game numbers, people. So naturally, colleges came calling. He ended up at Louisiana Tech. But here's the thing. His freshman year, he was ruled academically ineligible. Couldn't play? And for a kid who'd built his entire identity around basketball, that had to be crushing. But Karl came back stronger. Sophomore year, he averaged 16.8 points and 8.8 rebounds per game. He won Southland Conference Player of the Year in 1983 and again in 1985. He was ready for the NBA, 1985 NBA draft. Karl Malone gets selected 13th overall by the Utah Jazz. Now let me tell you why this part is wild. 12 teams passed on him. 12. And Karl never forgot that. He kept a chip on his shoulder for his entire career, using that draft day disrespect as motivation. And Utah? That was the perfect fit for him. Blue-collar city, hard-working culture. No flash, just results. Karl averaged nearly 15 points and 9 rebounds in his rookie year, and people started calling him the mailman because he always delivered. By his second season, he was averaging over 20 points per game, and then came the moment that would define his career, the partnership with John Stockton. The pick and roll, Stockton to Malone, over and over and over again. One of the most unstoppable duos in NBA history. Karl Malone went from poverty in Louisiana to stardom in Utah. The dream had come true. He was rich, he was famous, he was on top of the world, but behind the scenes, there was a darkness that nobody wanted to talk about. Alright, so this is where the story takes a turn, and I need you to pay close attention, because what I'm about to tell you is disturbing, it's inexcusable, and it's been swept under the rug for way too long. Karl Malone is 20 years old, a college student at Louisiana Tech, and he had with a 13-year-old girl named Gloria Bell. Let me say that again.
And answering the bell every night.
A 20-year-old college athlete. Now, I don't care what era we're talking about. I don't care what year it was. That is statutory rape. Under Louisiana law at the time, that crime was punishable by up to 7 years in prison. A 13-year-old cannot consent. Period. Gloria Bell gave birth to a son named Demetress Bell when she was just 14 years old. A child having a child, and Karl Malone, he abandoned them. Just walked away, chased his NBA dreams, and left that little boy and his teenage mother to fend for themselves. Now here's the part that makes me sick. The Bell family didn't press charges. Why? Because they were struggling financially. They couldn't afford the legal battle. They couldn't afford to go up against a rising basketball star with resources and connections. So Karl Malone got away with it, but the story doesn't end there. In 1985, the Bell family filed a paternity suit. They wanted Karl to take responsibility for his son. And you know what Karl did? He denied everything. Said the child wasn't his. Ignored court summons. Acted like it never happened. It wasn't until 1988, when a DNA test came back showing 99.9% paternity, that the truth came out. The test proved what everyone already knew. Demetress Bell was Karl Malone's son. So what did Karl do? Did he step up and be a father? Did he apologize and try to make things right? Nah. He was ordered to pay $125 a week in child support. That's it. $125 a week. This is a man making millions of dollars in the NBA, and he's fighting to avoid paying $125 a week to support the child he abandoned. Demetress grew up fatherless. No father figure. No support. No guidance. And when Demetress finally reached out to Karl at 17 years old, hoping for some kind of relationship, you know what Karl told him?
Malone was 20 years old, impregnated a 13-year-old. Got the fuck away from her. Wanted nothing to do with the baby. The story's about, well, you know he's about to be a pro athlete, so take from that what you want.
You need to make it on your own. Let that sink in. A millionaire NBA superstar telling his own son, a kid he abandoned, to figure it out by himself. The same man who preached about hard work and accountability refused to take responsibility for his own child, and it gets worse. Because Demetress wasn't the only child Karl abandoned. When Karl was just 17 years old, he fathered twins, a boy named Daryl and a girl named Cheryl Ford, with a woman named Bonita Ford. And just like with Demetress, Karl had minimal involvement in their lives, minimal financial support. He just moved on. Now here's the irony that'll make your blood boil. Cheryl Ford went on to become a WNBA star, a champion. She made something of herself despite having an absent father. And Karl? He never publicly acknowledged her accomplishments, never celebrated her success. Nothing. But wait, it gets even more hypocritical. In 1990, Karl Malone married Kay Kinsey, Miss Idaho, 1988, and together they had 4 children. And you know what?
The kid, 17 years later, 17 years old, says, listen, dog, it's too late for me to it's too late for me to be a dad to you. You got to go get it out the mud, get it on your own.
Karl was a present, involved father to those kids. He showed up for them, supported them, loved them publicly. So let me get this straight. Karl Malone could be a good father when he wanted to be, when it was convenient, when it fit his public image. But his older children, the ones who needed him most, they didn't matter. He built this public persona as a family man, a man of discipline and hard work. Meanwhile, he had kids out there growing up without a father, without support, without the love they deserved. That's not a mistake, y'all. That's a choice. That's hypocrisy at its finest. And that's what makes Karl Malone's story so infuriating. Because while he was out here preaching about accountability, about working hard, about being a man of your word, he was avoiding responsibility in his personal life. The same man who never missed a game, who was reliable on the court, who earned the nickname the mailman because he always delivered, that same man failed to deliver as a father, failed to deliver as a man. His public persona was built on discipline and consistency. But behind closed doors, moral failures, abandonment, cowardice. Alright, so fast forward to 2003. Karl Malone Malone is 40 years old. His career with the Jazz is over. He's never won an NBA championship, and he's desperate for that ring before he retires. So he signs with the Los Angeles Lakers for $1.5 million. And on paper, this team is stacked.
Even though he was worth millions of dollars, the family just requested $125 a week, $500 a month. At that time, Karl Malone was worth $3 million. But still, he declined that financial request, saying that $125 a week is just too much for him to pay. This man was worth millions.
Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Gary Payton, and now Karl Malone. This was supposed to be his redemption arc, his final shot at glory, but 2004 happened, and with it, one of the most disgusting incidents of Karl Malone's career. During a Lakers game, Karl Malone made inappropriate comments toward Vanessa Bryant, Kobe's wife. And these weren't just inappropriate, they were vile. He made comments about hunting for little Mexican girls, racially insensitive, predatory, disgusting. Now let me tell you why this part is wild. Kobe confronted him. Kobe, his own teammate, had to step to Karl and tell him that what he said was unacceptable. And you know what Karl did? He denied it, said it never happened, tried to play the victim. That incident created a rift in the locker room. The team fell apart, and Karl Malone's NBA career ended not with a championship, not with glory, but in disgrace. And here's the pattern you need to see. Offense, denial, deflection, over and over again. That's Karl Malone's playbook. And the NBA? They did nothing. No suspension, no fine, no disciplinary action. They swept it under the rug just like they did with everything else. That's the double standard, y'all. That's how the league protected its stars while victims suffered in silence. So Karl Malone retires in 2004, and over the next few years he works hard to rebuild his image. He builds a business empire, he does charity work, he shows up to community events. In 2010 he gets inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, and during that ceremony everybody celebrated his career, his stats, his work ethic, his legacy. But you know what nobody talked about? Gloria Bell, Demetress Bell, the abandoned children.
Work, you earn it, you enjoy your rewards. And when one take from another, you're next. It's easy to take from you. But when you earn it, me personally, through my eyes, with conviction, I will protect it to the death. Because I earned it.
The predatory behavior. None of it. Because this was before social media really took off. Before accountability culture. Before Me Too. Back then, if you controlled the media narrative, you controlled your legacy. And Karl Malone crafted this public image of humility and gratitude, while the truth stayed buried. Most fans had no idea. They saw the stats, the Hall of Fame bust, the legend. They didn't know the full story. And when Karl did occasionally address his flaws, he used vague language. I made mistakes. I'm not perfect. I've learned and grown. But he never took full responsibility, never apologized to his victims, never made amends. He used surface-level accountability to protect his reputation while avoiding the real consequences of his actions. But then 2020 happened, and everything changed. ESPN released The Last Dance documentary about Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. And in that documentary, Karl Malone was featured. And suddenly, a whole new generation of basketball fans started looking into his story. And you know what they found? The Gloria Bell case, the abandoned children, all of it. Social media exploded. Hashtags like for Karl Malone 13 inches started trending, a reference to the 13-year-old victim and Malone being drafted 13th. Dark, but it showed how angry people were. The reaction was outrage, disgust, demands for accountability. Young fans who'd never heard these stories were horrified. They couldn't believe that this man was celebrated as a hero while having such a dark past. And then in 2023, the NBA made a huge mistake. They brought Karl Malone back as a judge for the slam dunk contest during All-Star Weekend. And the fans? They booed him, loudly. The arena was filled with boos. Social media went crazy. People were calling for the NBA to stop platforming him. Modern commentators started re-examining his entire legacy. Articles were written. Videos were made. The conversation shifted from Karl Malone the basketball legend to Karl Malone the predator. And here's what's important to understand. This wasn't just about cancel culture or people being sensitive. This was a generational divide. Younger fans grew up in the Me Too era. They grew up with social justice movements.
That's gotta be super awkward to like be forced to stand next to somebody you know like has this stink on them, and then it's gonna come up because that's just the world that we live in now.
This 6'11", built like a brick house dog. Ain't nobody gonna say nothing about it.
He can smell like dog shit.
Ain't
You talking about
nobody gonna say
stink?
nothing about it.
He can smell like cow manure, and nobody say.
They grew up believing that actions have consequences and that famous people shouldn't get a pass for horrible behavior. And when they looked at Karl Malone, they didn't see a hero. They saw a man who hurt children, abandoned his responsibilities, and never faced real consequences. Even NBA players started speaking out. Victor Wembanyama, the young Spurs star, reposted a video about Karl Malone's past with the caption, "Lock up his AE." That's how the next generation sees him, not as the mailman, as a predator who got away with it. And here we are in 2025, and Karl Malone still hasn't really changed. He still minimizes his crimes as mistakes. He still hasn't made amends to his victims or his abandoned children. He's living privately in Louisiana, away from the NBA spotlight. But the conversation about him isn't going away. Polls in 2025 show that 62% of fans want him removed from the Hall of Fame. 62%. That's not a small minority. That's a majority of basketball fans saying, this man doesn't deserve to be honored. The younger generation sees Karl Malone as a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when we worship athletes without holding them accountable for who they are as human beings. And the debates are getting louder. In 2023, Louisiana Tech unveiled a statue of Karl Malone on campus. And you know what happened? Protests. People showed up and demanded it be taken down. In Utah, over 15,000 people signed a petition to remove his statue from the Delta Center. 15,000 signatures. The question that keeps coming up is this: should talent overshadow morality? Should someone's basketball career excuse their behavior off the court? And more people are saying no. Hell no. So here's the thing about Karl Malone's downfall. It's not just about what he did in 1983. It's not just about one crime, one mistake, one moment. It's about decades of denial, decades of refusing to take responsibility, decades of living in privilege and comfort while his victims suffered, decades of hypocrisy. Demetress Bell, that little boy who grew up without a father, went on to play in the NFL. He made something of himself despite the odds. And that success symbolizes strength, resilience, survival. But Karl Malone's silence? That symbolizes cowardice. The mailman was once a symbol of reliability, of consistency, of always showing up and delivering, but now he's a symbol of hypocrisy. A man who preached accountability but never practiced it. A man who had the power, the resources, and the platform to make things right, but chose not to. His story is a warning against hero worship, a warning against giving athletes a free pass just because they're good at putting a ball in a hoop, a warning about the dangers of unaccountable power. Karl Malone's legacy isn't defined by the 36,928 points he scored. It's not defined by his 2 MVP trophies or his Hall of Fame induction. It's defined by his moral failures, by the children he abandoned, by the pain he caused, by the accountability he refused to accept. And that's how history will remember him. All right, y'all, that's the story of Karl Malone. From legend to controversy, from hero to villain. If this video opened your eyes to something you didn't know before, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're breaking down more stories like this, uncovering the truth behind the headlines. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, click one of the boxes on your screen for more similar content. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.